Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for the intro. All right, let's just dive right into it because the intro is done. Just a quick heads up for just a couple of resources that you may prefer looking into. Um, my main goal is to basically make 98% of the entire process free. I have not put that slide in here, but basically the 98% of this entire college applications process free. So if you'd like to check out some of the info on my Facebook and my Instagram, it should help you get oriented in your college applications process. And I sort of send out these snippets of different parts of the applications process along the way with a few details. So check it out if it's your thing. All right, other than that, let's dive into it. So theories are the major topics we'll talk about. And as Sarah mentioned, that I'll pause usually between all of these topics just for any kind of questions that come along. And I mean, if it's anything like a presentation I did like a couple days ago at the Wilton Library, there was a lot of questions coming in. So if that's the thing, then we'll pause and answer pretty much every question that we can with respect to time. Just again, like I said, shoot a questions in the chat. Okay, so topics we're going to talk about. PSATs, what are they? How important are they? Should you be prepping for them? Then we're moving to the SAT or the digital SAT versus ACT, and we're going to break it down a little bit more with the upcoming changes. Then we're doing reporting, it's just score reporting. How does that work? What are some words that you need to know that surround this process? And of course, a couple of FAQs that come up and the upcoming test dates. All right. And as before I end any presentation, I always like to leave you all with a solid plan, something that you know you can do right now to help you advance in your process. So we'll talk about what you should do next. Okay, so the major components of the college applications process. Now there are four major components, the way that I categorize them, and you might see them categorized a little bit differently based on a different company, based on different college counselors, but really the bullet points that are going to come up are all the same. So the first one we have is coursework, and there's an asterisk there because it is the most important part of your entire college application, because ultimately college is just more schooling. And how would a university know how you're going to do as a student? Simple, look at your previous history. So coursework is the most important part of your entire college application, unless of course you're going in as an athlete or you're going in as the arts, and those would be really the major exceptions. But all right, when it comes to coursework, we have the weighted and unweighted GPA, which basically the weighted GPA accounts for the difficulty level of a class. So getting a B in an AP class was much more difficult than getting a B in a regular class of that same subject. And a weighted GPA is at a 4.0, or sorry, 5.0. Then the unweighted GPA is at a 4.0, and that one just does not care about the difficulty level of a course. So you have the weighted and unweighted GPAs. Then after that, there's the grades in the higher level classes, the APs, the honors, the international baccalaureate, which we don't, in Reading, we don't have the international baccalaureate. Closest program is in Norwalk, and then I believe in New Haven as in the north. So don't worry about international baccalaureate, but then we also have dual enrollment. And dual enrollment, just a quick definition, is when students take college classes, it's not the same as APs. You take college classes, but you're affiliated with the college in some way. So either that means you're physically going into the university or let's say Norwalk Community College and actually taking classes there, or your class in high school has some kind of program that lets you basically be in that class in high school, but also be getting college credit for. And that a lot of times, let's say with West Hill and a couple other high schools, they've been affiliated with UConn. So varies based on high schools and based on states, districts, everything. So if you are interested in something like that, your guidance counselor is the best person to talk to about that program. And finally, class rank. So I know that Reading does not do class rank, and I do want to point out that anything at all in this process that has to do with the high school and not you and your choices, that's not your responsibility. So let's say the high school does not do class ranks, and now you have to leave that section blank in the application, and that's okay. Okay, that was not your fault. Same thing with GPAs or something. Some high schools have GPAs that are measured on a scale of 1 or like 1 to 100 instead of the 4.0, 5.0 scale. Okay, but that's not your fault. So, or it's not your responsibility, so it's not going to count against you. In Barlow, except for I believe it's the one AP class for computer science, all the other APs only juniors and seniors can take. That's not your problem. Because even though at other high schools, yes, APs are allowed in 10th grade, some in 9th grade and onwards, which means comparatively, yes, those other students may have more APs on their transcripts than your child might. It's okay because the guidance counselors will send out something called a school profile, which is a PDF. It varies in page numbers. Some could be 4 or 5, 6, 10 pages. And it basically lays out, hey, here's what the school offers. And then the statistics for everything, which will be the average GPAs, average SAT scores, ACT scores, AP subjects offered, and so on. So that's how the universities will find out where the high school stands and where the student stands in comparison to the programs offered at that particular high school. I hope that makes sense so far. Okay, then of course there's the SAT, ACT component. And I know that there has been this big shift to test optional, and we are going to address that in the future. But for now, let's just keep going. I'll gloss over the SAT, ACT because we're going to be talking about it for the rest of our time. All right, then we have the personal component. And the personal component will be the extracurricular activities that you do, which includes the jobs, the volunteering, the sports, the student organizations, the hobbies even, or if you're do have any kind of serious family responsibilities, that all counts as a part of the extracurricular activities. Then there's honors and achievements, and these are the academic honors and achievements. So if it's an extracurricular related, meaning, hey, the state robotics or the state swim or dive or so on, that's going to be listed in the extracurriculars. But now if it's academic, so NHS, National Honor Society, honor roll, or even the junior writing portfolio that students do in Barlow, even though that's only a school web project and it's not nationally recognized, that still counts as an achievement, especially because the portfolio is out of a 6. And if you end up with a 5.5, that's a really good score listed on your application. Okay. All right. Then of course there's the sort of the nice sprinkles on top of everything, which is going to be your college essay and your supplemental essays. And your college essay, AKA personal statement, that's going to add a personality to everything, because so far, yes, they can glean that what kind of student you are based on your classes and the grades you've gotten. They can glean what your interests are based on your extracurricular activities, but really they don't know your quirkiness. They don't know things that are not mentioned already. So do you have a student who likes making fudge? That's fun. And we didn't end up writing your college essay about it, but she did mention it at one part in her application. Then there was another student who his extracurricular activities, his everything, is showed that he was in jazz band and a cappella, and there's some other, I forget, in theater, I believe. Everything that seems like something you'd connect to an extrovert. But then he wrote his essay on just how he was an introvert who in 9th grade realized that he needed to learn how to speak. So he also joined debate. And he needed to learn how to be in front of people. Without that mentioned in the college essay, no one would have ever known that side of him, or how much of a struggle doing all of those activities were for him. Okay. And just a quick brief, supplemental essays are these mini essays that some, but not all universities have. And universities can have anywhere from 0 to 1 to 3 to 4 supplementals. It really just varies by university. So factor that in when you're thinking of all the work that needs to get done. It's not just the college essay. The universities you're applying to may also have supplemental essays. And finally, the miscellaneous, the guidance counselor's recommendation, teacher's recommendations, the interviews that may or may not be a part of this process, and then demonstrated interest. Okay, and just a quick thing on demonstrated interest, because that's a common question that comes up. What are ways you could show the university you're genuinely interested? Number 1, open their emails. Number 2, click around on links that are embedded in their emails. So, because some universities, and we don't know which ones because they don't share that data. And that's the thing about all these the methods of demonstrated interest that we can show, is that we don't know which ones the universities you're interested in are tracking, and they vary by university. So you can open their emails and they'll look at the data on how many people and who open the emails. They might even look at, oh, how many people clicked around on the links that are embedded in the emails. Then you can also talk to the marketing representatives that come to your high school, or that even if they don't come to your high school, usually most universities will have someone quote unquote local, which might even be regional. So if you're genuinely interested in that university, just reach out to the marketing rep and introduce yourself, ask a few genuine questions about the university, and kind of build that bridge, the connection, right? So just do that. Then the other way to demonstrate interest, you can take a college tour, and ideally, if it's doable within a day trip, is my rule. Is if you can do it within a day trip, then it's highly recommended that you do the college tour. And finally, I'm forgetting one, but finally, email genuine questions. So do your research about the university, whatever programs you're interested in. If you don't know what it is you want to study, okay, cool. Then look up what it is how do they help you figure that out? So do that research. Then genuine questions, information that's not just already on the university's website, because you want to show that you looked and you did your homework. So email those questions to admissions and use the email that you're going to be using for your application. So that way they can make that connection if this is one of the factors they're tracking. All right, any questions so far? We're going to be talking about the SAT. Okay, so no questions so far posted in the chat. So we're just going to continue to the PSATs part. Now, in the chat, actually, while I'm talking, if you could just please post what grade your teenager is in, if you're a parent, and if you're a teenager, just post what grade you're in. And if you have multiple teenagers, then just post whatever grades they're in, just so I know what information is relevant, meaning if we need to talk about PSATs in detail, I can. If not, then we'll gloss over it. So, all right, we have a lot of 11th graders so far. And an 8th grader. Okay, so I'll mention this for particularly the 8th graders there and the 9th graders, that the PSAT does not count for anything until about 11th grade. Until then, it's really meant to be a PSAT, a practice SAT. And unless you have a specific program that you're trying to do, a summer program, let's say at a university, there's a summer camp or there's a Discover XYZ University. I'm trying to think of that specific university. So obviously the name, Syracuse, there we go. Discover Syracuse, like Discover whatever university. If you're trying to do that specific program and that requirement states that you might need PSATs, or if you're trying to apply for specific scholarships and they state that they need PSATs, but in general, most places want the actual SAT score, not the PSAT. So that's up until 10th grade, right? And one more thing to know about the PSAT is it's not an accurate indicator of how you're going to do on the SAT, because what happens in the PSAT is it does not include all of the topics, that, particularly math topics, that will be found on the SAT. Let's say in 8th grade, you're not going to see the Algebra 2 concepts because in general, as a country, most 8th graders across the country have not taken Algebra 2. Most 9th graders across the country may not have taken Algebra 2, but they might have taken geometry. So those questions will be added on to the test. And then same thing in 10th grade, now they'll add on the Algebra 2, which will be added on top of the geometry, which will be in addition to the data analysis and Algebra 1. All right, so just something to factor in when you're thinking of, okay, but how are you gonna do on the SAT? I don't know, let's take a look at the PSAT. Might not be the best connector. Now in 11th grade, PSATs are coming up next month. It is currently September, so usually around mid-October, the PSATs come up. And things you need to know about that. One is that it's also called the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, NMSQT test. I always forget the order, the acronym, so I have to say the full thing out. But yes, the National Merit, and it's a qualifying test, which basically means that if you do really well, we're talking near perfect, like a 1450-ish, right? 1400s, then you may qualify to enter this entire National Merit Scholarship. But then remember that they're going to ask for the other parts of your application, and they're going to filter and weed out and weed out and weed out until they have their finalist. So just something to keep in mind when you're thinking of SAT stuff. We'll talk more about best prep times for the SAT, because what's going to happen is by junior year, ideally, and we have a lot of juniors, so I don't even know if I need to consider, I don't really need to talk about it because you all want to know what's going on now. Do we have any 10th graders here? Just post in the chat if we do. But if not, then I'll just, we can talk about it a little bit later when I get to the timeline. But okay, SAT, this is the part you've all been waiting for. So what's happening? Well, as of March 2024, this exam is 100% online. The ACT was supposed to go through changes pre-COVID, and then they looks like they just completely scrapped the whole thing. So we don't know what's happening there, but for now, it's still paper-based and it's still the normal like 2 hour, almost 3 hour exam. Now, the structure, really, you have reading English, which is 60, it's broken into 2 sections, and then we have math. And here we still have the 4 sections, the English, the math, the reading, and the science. And overall time, now it's decreased. SAT used to be a 3 hour exam. And now its official test time is 2 hours and 14 minutes, but keep in mind that that does not include the breaks and it does not include the proctoring time. So you're still looking at about 3 hours of testing. And here you're looking at 3.5 to 4 hours of being in that room. Now, break it down even further. So with the reading section of the SAT, now the reading section is, there will be 4 sections in this test. The first 2 sections will be reading, and the next 2 sections will be math. So in the reading sections, the test is now going to do something a little bit interesting. The test is going to say, hey, if you do section 1 in reading, everyone's going to have roughly the same general questions. But then it's going to be an adaptive exam. So it's going to play to the strengths, hopefully, and probably a few weaknesses of your teenager. So you do section 1, it gets a feel for what your strengths and weaknesses are. And then section 2 is going to be different for every student, depending on what their performance was in section 1. So it's a little weird. And so far what's happened is that the exam has been rolled out internationally as of March 2022 or 23, sorry, this past March. And it's had some good feedback, but we don't really know much detail about the actual test questions. So that's the unfortunate part of just how it plays out when it says it's adaptive. But that's basically what we're looking at. Now, in the old SAT, the exam used to have 5 passages and about 10 to 11 questions based on those passages. And now what's going to happen is and we're going to take a look at this, by the way. We're going to go onto the software and pull up exams and everything. So don't worry about trying to get all of this down and trying to picture what this test looks like. We're going to take a look at this once we're done with this general information. So here, every question is really going to have this huge paragraph of information. And teenagers, this sucks for you, but now that I'm no longer a teenager, I'm kind of glad that vocab is back. And we had to study vocab prior to the exam that changed in 2016. When I took the test, I had to know the vocab, and we'd have to sit there with the 250 flashcards and so on. But the thing is that it really helped advance my vocabulary, because at some point in high school, you stop taking spelling tests. So your vocab ends up really being stuck at a certain point unless you read on your own. But either most teenagers don't have time for that, or most teenagers are not interested in that. So you kind of end up stuck at this 10th grade level of vocab or this 9th grade level of vocab. So this is a good way to now have you practicing again for vocab. But yeah, there's vocab. And these, again, they're total 54 questions, and they're going to be broken down into 2 32-minute modules. Between the reading and the math section, they're going to have a 10-minute break. Now, English is no longer a separate section. It used to be a separate section in the SAT that's going up until this December, but now it's no longer going to be a separate section. It's just whatever is going to be reading / grammar related is just in that reading section. Math has the 44 questions, and again, that's going to be 22 questions per section. And like I said, with the reading, it's also going to be adaptive. So let's say you get to the first math section, which is section 3 of the entire test. That's everyone's going to have the same questions. And then you get to the second part of the math, and suddenly it's adaptive. Now they're playing to your strengths and weaknesses, particular to you, as opposed to the general question set that everyone used to get. The one thing that has stayed consistent is that the SAT has the same topics covered. So it still has the arithmetic, algebra 1, algebra 2. Again, I always put the trigonometry in there because that's officially how College Board labels it. However, it's not real trigonometry. It's the geometry plus SOHCAHTOA, which usually most students cover at the end of geometry. And then the data analysis, which is look at a graph, answer the questions, mean, median, mode, some percentages, and so on. So it's the math content has not changed. And I would probably say the biggest change has come into the reading, and the fact that it's completely digital, but the biggest change has come into the reading. And unlike the current SAT, this digital exam is 100% calculator. So you're allowed to use your calculator for the entire math section. And there's a digital calculator, which we'll see once I pull up the software, which is by Desmos. So a lot of students are used to Desmos. And I'm one of those that I really need my handheld device because I'm so used to pushing the buttons and graphing and whatever's needed. And you're allowed to take that too. So either option is available to you. You can do the online calculator or you could do the physical calculator. Now, science. So I've talked about the SAT, and even before the SAT never had science, it simply had science-y seeming questions, which were really just questions based on visuals, like graphs, charts, etc. And they would just merge the score into other stuff, but that's no longer relevant. There's no science involved at all with this new exam. So that's, I don't know, good for some, not good for others. But remember, they'll still put some visual-based questions in the math, so you're not completely away from it. Now, ACT still has the 4 reading passages with the 40 multiple choice questions. It still has the 75 multiple choice questions in the 45 minutes for the grammar. And then notice here, there's extras in the math, which is the major difference between the 2 exams. Is number one, it's a time crunch exam. You'll always have more questions than you have time in the ACT. And then number 2, it's that it has pre-calculus in there and it has trigonometry. Now, this is real trigonometry. It's not what you saw in the SAT. Here, you have to know law of cosines, law of sines, that level. The trigonometry you cover in the first part of pre-calculus, usually, depending on which teacher you had. Some do it second semester, but usually it's first semester. And then you'll actually need to know some overall concepts of pre-calculus, matrices, vectors, can't think of anything else at the moment, but yes, you do need to know more math depth. Now, a common question I get here is, so if I want to show a university that I'm a strong math candidate or a strong math student, should I then take the ACT? And my answer would be no, because you really want to prepare for the exam that has more prep material available, and SAT does a better job of that than ACT. If you want to show that you're a strong math candidate, then I recommend taking the AP classes associated with the math as opposed to taking the ACT, because this is really just it's a gloss over. No one's really taking this seriously as a demonstration of your math abilities. Okay. Now, ACT does have a science section. It's an official science section, 40 questions in 35 minutes. It's not really a science background required question, so you don't have to know your chemistry or biology. It's really just left side of the page is visuals, charts, experiment descriptions, and everything. And then on the right side of the page, you have the questions. Students generally struggle with this section because of that constant back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So they tend to run out of time, which is what the major downside is. It's not that it's difficult. There's some zingers in there, but usually it's just that the constant back and forth to look for information kills the time that you have for it. So that covers that portion. All right, like I said, calculator. So now across both exams as of March, so if you're going to take the SAT now in October, November, December, then you still have to follow the old guidelines, which there's no calculator for section 3 in that one. But in the new exam, there will be it's 100% calculator. All right, scoring. I have another slide for this, so I'm just gonna. Oh, and the ACT also has an optional 40-minute essay that is scored independently of all sections. So it's not combined in anything. And with ACT, you might also see an experimental section, which is just an extra section. There are 4 sections that we talked about, but they might add in a 5th section, which really does not count for anything. It's just the organization, the company testing out questions on students to make sure that it roughly leads to a 50% accuracy rate, because that's what both of these exams are designed to do. They're designed to lead students to about a 50% pass rate or accuracy rate, because that's what standardized testing does. Okay, so a couple of key points. And with the ACT, I would say if you understand the scoring system, you can beat the test. SAT, we're still trying to understand the whole system. So it's a lot of, you guys are guinea pigs. All you 11th graders, you're the guinea pigs. You'll find out for us, and then you'll share all this information of what happens, or even if you don't share the information, though, we'll have more reports coming in, which is what we can look at. Each exam, so SAT hasn't mentioned an experimental section, but they still do have to test questions somehow. So just note that the first 4 sections you do are going to be the ones that count for anything. If there's an extra 5th section, even your proctors may not know that this doesn't count, but that 5th section does not count. But you should still take it seriously, because if you have to do any kind of retake, you want to know what the test makers are thinking, right? That way you have an idea what you should prepare for and what to review. All right, so extended time, the rules are still the same. So if at any point you need extended time, have needed extended time, make sure that you have your 504 plan in place, because that can take months. Sometimes it takes 5-6 months to get your 504 plan in place, and you have to work with your guidance counselor to do it. It's not, unless you're homeschooled, it's not something that you can just do directly with College Board or with the ACT, depending on which exam you're taking. And now that you've seen both exams and the breakdowns, you kind of have an idea of which one you might want to take. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide as well. But for now, if you think you qualify for extended time and you have all the paperwork and everything ready to go, make sure you talk to your guidance counselor as soon as possible to get this thing done. Okay, most common when it comes to extended time is time and a half. So if you do get approved, you're probably going to get time and a half. However, under special circumstances, students can either get twice the time, or they might get unlimited time, depending again on what the medical situation is. Any questions so far? Nothing in the chat? Okay, this is going to be a very quick presentation then. We're going to head over to I believe right after I finish this slide, we're going to head over to or to the software. Okay, so according to the most recent data, which is the entirety of last year, first of all, scoring for the SAT is lowest you could go is 400, and that scale will be staying the same for the new SAT. So it's going to be the lowest is 400, and the absolute perfect score is at 1600. Averages about a 1050. Now, if you're really, I wrote an above average here, but it really depends on where you want to go. So you have to be aware of which universities you want to go to, because if you're thinking, let's say Harvard, Princeton, Yale, then you need about a 1450 or above. NYU, Boston University, 1450 and above. Okay. And then if you're thinking something, again, now it's changed so much since COVID, because suddenly all the universities that first used to ask for 1350, like NYU, now suddenly say actually a 1450. So, but usually a 1300 plus is always a good score. It's going to open a lot of doors for you. And if you're not considering an Ivy League or one of those really, really high up there universities, then it opens a lot of doors, and you don't have to worry about being limited by your SAT number. Okay. And then, yes. Okay, so then ACT, and by the way, all the messages popping up in the chat, I do see them and I want to acknowledge them. And once I finish with this part of the presentation, I will get to your questions. So I have not missed them. Okay, so ACT, the lowest you could go is a 1. That's it. That's out. And then the highest you can go is a 36. That's a perfect score. Now, average is about a 20, but let's say again, you're thinking of Harvard, Princeton, Yale, top universities, they want a 32 or above. Okay, then the next tier down, ideally like the nice universities, so to speak, will want the 27 or above. And after that, it just varies. So one of the major things to take away from this is you really should have an idea of it. Actually, we have a lot of 11th graders. At this point, you want to have an idea of which universities you're looking at, even if you're not confirmed and you have, let's say, 30 universities on your list or 40 universities on your list and you haven't cleaned it up, that's fine. But you need to know what the most competitive universities on your list are so that you can start figuring out what your testing approach is going to look like. And we're going to talk about this whole test optional thing as well. Okay, so first to address the questions in the chat. When does the new SAT begin? It starts in this upcoming March. So March 2024, which is the first time in the year that the SAT is ever administered. It's every March. That's going to be the first time that the new SAT is implemented. And yeah, so I do, yeah, MIT, and oh, that's actually a good point. So someone in the chat mentioned that MIT has a median math score that they've mentioned. This brings me to the point of why I mentioned that you need to know which university you want to go into, because what I want you to do is basically into Google, you type in the name of the university and then admission stats. So I shared my PowerPoint. I'm going to pause there and I'm just going to share my desktop, which will also help me then share my the screen for the SAT software. So let's say MIT admissions stats. Okay, you ideally, whatever university you have, you're typing in the admission stats. Once you type that in, you're looking for the .org or .edu. You don't want to trust all the blog posts that come out with or really it should be yeah. So you really don't want to get your data from the blog post. It's nothing wrong with blog posts. It's just that we have so many universities in the country that it's hard to update the data every single year for that information. So at least for the numerical portion, you want your information to come from the actual university. Okay. And now what's going on? So usually when you see the admission statistics, and I'm going to zoom in, you'll have the number of applications that went in, how many were admitted. Then you have the some of them will go into detail, and these reports vary by universities. So just because MIT has been pretty nice in sharing the early action and how many were admitted and the regular action and how many were admitted and so on, and waitlist data and everything, not every university is going to do that. But a lot of universities will give you the range for SATs and ACTs and such. Yeah, SAT math is roughly, basically they want near perfect score. So like I said, how MIT or any of these, or Harvard, Yale, Princeton, et cetera. And I said, okay, 1450 or above, looks like they have their range right here. Okay, so that's they told you what to aim for. So now it's your job to actually go in and that's what you're aiming for. Do that for any university you're interested in. Just type in the name of the university, admission statistics, and sometimes it will pop up as freshman class profile or class of 2028 and 2029 profile or something like that. Okay, I probably went a little too far up there. I made up the numbers, so math didn't work out. Either way, so it might have it under different labels, but look up that data because that's how you figure out what your target score should be when you're going through this process. Okay, then one of the other questions that we have in the chat is, oh, any chance I'll share the, yes, please email me, which you can email me, and also as a part of this presentation or part of this, at the end, you'll all receive an email from Sarah, the teen librarian, and she'll basically be sharing my email and the PDF of this PowerPoint. So probably should have said that earlier, and I'm so sorry. I forgot to, but yes, if you do have any, or not if you do, it's based, don't scribble everything, don't rush to write, just make sure you have the notes that are not written already, because you'll have oh yes, Sarah answered that question. Okay, and then the question, what are the highest scores for reading and for math? So breakdown per section is, let's go back. Okay, so breakdown by section is going to be that we have the 200 to 800 scale here, and then nothing there, but 200 to 800 scale there. So the minimum you can get is a 200 in each section, and then the maximum you can get is an 800. So that way total would be out of the 1600, which would be the perfect score. Oh, there we go. Oh, no, that's an average score. Yeah. So that's a breakdown by then. Okay. So what else do we have? All right. Looks like we don't have any further questions. Okay. So now let's dive into the software. So there's a software from College Board called Blue Book. Now in this new SAT, couple of technical things are going to come up. Number one, you get to use your own laptop. So you will be asked to take your own laptop, which in a way it's great because you're comfortable with the keys and the way it works already. So if you don't have a laptop, they will have extras available for you. And also you can, when you are registering for the test on College Board, so College Board is the one in charge of all your SAT, ACT, or not ACT, sorry, College Board. I'm going to do one thing at a time. Let's type first and then talk. So anything that has to do with SAT, APs, PSATs, College Board is your main source. So this is where you go to register for your SATs. Now, as you go about through this registration process, and especially for the digital SAT and all of these other, by the way, here's where you would find all the other detailed information if you have any other questions, or have any specific things you'd want to know, particularly about the disabilities and accommodations and so on. So this is your main website for SAT stuff. And then ACT, I should have pulled up the incognito because they'll usually still show up first in your search. But ACT is this one, and you can just register for the exam right there. Now, going back to SAT. So if you register for the digital exam, they'll guide you through the process. But if, let's say, you don't have a working laptop, maybe it's glitchy, maybe something's going on, as you register, you can actually ask for a laptop to be ready for you at your test site. So you're basically allowed to use it for the test, and then you just give it right back. Now, here's a software you'll have to download on your laptop. It's called Bluebook. And Bluebook, it looks like this. What's going to happen on test day, and notice here it says practice and prepare, but here it says your test. So if I'd registered for a test, this is where my test would pop up. And at that point, Bluebook would actually lock my computer. So I can't open any other screen. This is the main screen that I see. Right now, because it's practice, they don't have any locks on it. And you can actually do the same. This is what your screen will look like too. If you're just doing like a practice full length exam or a test preview, yours will also look like this. But just for official test day, you're supposed to download the software the week of the test, make sure it works, everything's all good. And then on the official test day, you end up opening your test, everything locks, and you start testing. Okay, so yes, with Bluebook, computer yours, calculator, let's do this. So test preview. Explore Bluebook, no lock. So notice I said no lockdown mode. Don't lock down the test previews on test days. Bluebook will prevent you from accessing other programs and apps. So you can have any other kinds of assistive tech. Again, this is all going to be pre-approved. So if you're approved for extra time or extra, like a longer break or more frequent breaks, that should all be already programmed into your Bluebook. Take your time, blah, blah. So this is just, again, because it's such a practice run. And they have APs too, but we're doing SATs. So we're preparing your preview, and there's another one that I could have also clicked on, but just keep going. And there we go. So now it's going to have a lot of directions. This is what your screen looks like. You have your timer up top, which is convenient. I still recommend taking your own wristwatch, which is something if you've been to a previous presentation, I've said it before. I usually tell all my students, don't rely on the tech. It's too much depends on timing for you to just rely on that one source. So just take a wristwatch, borrow your parents' wristwatch. But all right, so the question in this addresses a number of, and then there's only one best answer is really all it's saying. It's multiple choice. That's another thing. This entire test is actually for the math. There are some fill in the blanks. Everything else is multiple choice. So that has stayed the same for math, which is in the current exam, we have the grid in section, which is free response. And on this, you also have free response. All right, so that vocab thing that I mentioned, precise word or phrasing. And then again, you have your information here. Now there are some annotation tools available to you. So over here, if I click on annotate, make a selection. So if I made a selection, let's pick something random. And then I click on annotate. Now I can make notes. So let's say, hi, I can save it. And then when I move my cursor over it, it comes up again down here. And it should just come up, yeah, like that too. So, and you can underline. So you have, it's kind of cool, but to be honest, it's a little annoying because I'm still old school. I think I prefer my highlighter to actually be my highlighter, but it's different in that the current exam does not allow for any highlighting. It was just pencil only. So then of course we have the vocab part for this particular question. Close it. You're also allowed to skip questions. So down here, you can mark questions. So you can do with sorry, I'm struggling with the Zoom windows. I'm actually going to close the chat for a bit, but that should help. Okay, so if we click on more, there's always the help and assisted and unscheduled break and exam, quit exam, etc. Then when we can skip around. So if I click on next, I can also mark questions for, oh, I need to come back to that later. I don't want to answer it right now. I might mark for review over here. I can also do strikeout. So I can say, it's definitely not A. What did I do? Yeah, of course it doesn't work right now. Hold on. Cross out answer choices you think are wrong. Yeah. So it's right here. So let's do that. Let's do that. Maybe it's that, but I'm going to mark for review. And what happens is when you mark for review, it gets started over here. So you can just really just go to that one screen and basically click on whichever question that needs review. You don't have to go back through all the questions to get to that previous question. So that's the nice part. It's that you just have the one platform. And to be honest, a lot of this was already happening, not by College Board, but for advanced exams like the MCAT or the GRE, basically to go into graduate school. A lot of these features were the same. We still had to take, when I took the GREs, we still had to go to a testing location, a computer lab, official location, and then our tests kind of looked like these. On one side, you have your words, a lot of words, and then you have to answer the question based on that. So I can see myself getting a little dizzy from something so annoying like this. Because I'm very much old school with the paper and pen when it comes to this, because I like annotating. But this will be something that students should really practice, because as I said, we're all used to annotating heavily on paper. Even now, it's with all the computers, usually when we have to annotate for AP Lang or anything, we do it on paper. So it seems minor, but remember, your time's still going to be running. You want to make sure you catch relevant details and annotate and can go through, smoothly navigate this entire test without any issues or being stuck or just your mind going glitchy because it's highlighted on a computer. So it's a psychological game as much as it's a strategy, right? Then you keep going, and what will ultimately happen, so keep saying next, and I'm going to leave everything blank, but what will ultimately happen is that module's over, saving my work. Students don't have a break between module 1, module 2. And in this case, they now skipped over, and they had the math section. So now section 2 is math. Okay. And now we have, like I said, the math content has not really changed. And we have 7 questions in this particular module. So it'll keep going. Like I said, they're going to have 22 questions in real life. And that module's over. And it's the same idea. Oh, actually, I should have gone back to the math and shown you the calculator. Okay. So once we go back, let's actually just do that. I can't access it because I'm not a student. Okay, let's go back to the test preview then. Right, so because that was a preview, they only did 2 sections instead of 4. But, and I kind of went through the math one too quickly because I really should have shown you the features for the calculator portion. So let's actually go through that a little bit. Come on. And module should be, there we go. I don't want to check my work, which by the way, I should never hear a student saying that. In my case, I don't want to check my work. Okay, so you have positive, find more than one correct answer, enter only one answer for all the free response questions. You can enter up to 5 characters for positive answers, 6 characters for negative sign because of the negative sign, subtraction, use a decimal equivalent. So they give you a few guidelines and they give you examples of how to input your answers. Students, you should be familiar with all of this before you walk into the test. The fact that you'll see this in your test instructions that should be a bonus. It should not be the first time that you're reading all of this. Okay, so let's close this. Now, a couple of things from the math section I actually neglected to point out in my rush to do everything. But first, here's your calculator. Like I said before, you're still allowed a physical calculator. So if you prefer to take your physical calculator, then by all means, go ahead. All right. And the question that we have is, do you know if right clicker, basically there's a shortcut to highlighting and annotating. At this point, I'm not familiar with any shortcuts that are allowed on this particular software. So it's really the long way of doing things is where we're at. But yeah, Desmos. So if you've used Desmos for school, then you might be familiar with how to use it. If you haven't, then maybe familiarize yourself if you're interested enough. Because like I said, take your graphing calculator with you. you still have the reference box. That has not changed. It looks pretty much the same. So all the information is still in the same location as it has been in this previous SAT. Now you just have it in a digital version as opposed to in print. Okay, so you still have your reference box for information. So those are the two major components I wanted to share. Calculators right here. Again, your timing is in the center, and that's obviously going to be rolling when you are testing. And then, of course, you have all the assistive help, exit exam, unscheduled breaks, and so on. So should be an interesting experience taking this test. Any questions on this? They tried to keep it fairly simple, and really for their own sake too, because of the more complicated you make it, the more you open yourself up to technical difficulties. So really those are the major parts of the test you need to know. Remember, now we're getting on the side of you're going to be using your laptop for 3 hours. Make sure you have your charger, or make sure your laptop is charged in advance. All that technicality stuff. Make sure your calculator has new batteries or it's charged, whichever calculator you have. Before I used to only have to say that for a calculator. Now I'm going to have to say that for a laptop too. Is your laptop charged? Make sure you charge your laptop the night before. But yeah, this is what the new test will look like. That's the screen. This is the layout. You get the strikeout option that's there. You get the annotate option that's not in the math one, and you will be receiving scrap paper. So that's usually my main question when it comes to math is, will I have scrap paper? The answer is yes, you will be given scrap paper, not taking your own. So you should have a pencil or some type of writing utensil with you. And then of course your scrap paper will be taken and collected at the end of the exam. Any questions? Okay, yeah, so this is what your new SAT is going to look like starting in March. And that's that. Okay, so now that we covered the upcoming changes, again, 100% digital. It's 2 hours and 14 minutes as we saw at the top of your screen. Timer's at the top of your screen. This was the information prior to. Okay, all right. So now that we've covered that, let's dive into some of the other aspects of testing and all the vocab and concepts that surround this entire process. So one term you're going to come across is called superscoring. And superscoring, what does that mean? I'm only going to use the SAT as an example because fewer numbers to deal with. As ACT does the exact same thing, it's just there are more numbers to talk about. So it's harder, it's a little bit more tedious to explain. But with the SAT, so let's say you've taken this test 3 times and a student has the highest score in reading on exam 3 and the highest score in math on exam 2. What a university that claims to super score, what they'll do is they'll simply take the 2 highest, whichever exams they came from, and add them for your new score considered for admission. Same thing happens for the ACT. They'll take the individual section scores, whichever is the highest from whichever exams, and you have a new composite score, which is going to be higher than any individual score. And that's going to be the score that's considered for your admissions. Now, some universities, their computer softwares automatically do this when you send in the scores. And some, while the computer softwares will automatically do this, they'll still see your previous score. So depends on how competitive the universities are and what they want to see and how picky they want to be when it comes to the admissions. All right, reporting scores. So when we're looking at reporting your scores, there are 2 ways this could go. One is score choice, which basically means that you could have taken this test 10 times, or in that previous example of 3 times. But a score choice university will say, hey, only send us the scores you want us to look at. So you'd only be sending in exams 2 and 3. They would never know you took exam 1. Okay, so you could have taken the test 10 times and they would never know. However, a university claims that needs your score history, now you have to send all your score reports in. So now if you've taken the test again 10 times, the university will know because you'll be asked to send in those score reports. Okay, so just be aware of that. Be very aware of which universities you want to apply to, what their policies are, before you decide how many times you want to take the test. Either test, SAT or ACT. Now, score reporting. So now let's say it's time to submit your applications. That time is here. And how does this work? It works 2 ways. One is self-reported scoring, which really means that on the college application called the Common App, you're just going to have a section in there that allows you to put in any scores that you want, your AP scores, your SATs, your ACT scores, I believe that, or international baccalaureate, or any other, basically any scores that you want to. And the university will say, hey, you just put it in, and you put in when you got the highest in math at XYZ date, and here's a score. You got the highest in reading at XYZ date, and here's the score. We're going to trust you. We're going to trust you until you are admitted to the university, and then we ask that you send in your official score report. Not every university does self-reported scoring, meaning, yes, the application has the section for you to report your score, but that doesn't mean it's accepted. Right? So now some universities do want you to send in the official score report no matter what, while others just to help you cut your cost, because as you can see, the score, the price for score submissions, it can get pretty expensive. So universities are trying to help find ways to cut that cost. Now, that's the pricing, but when you register for these exams, you get 4 free score reports, and that option can only be used up until 9 days after your test date. So if after the 9 days after testing, which really you don't know what you got at that point, usually it takes 2 to 3 weeks at minimum to find out your score. So if you don't use that for free score report option, you will be paying $14 for the SAT, and you'd be paying $18.50 for the ACT score reports to be sent. And considering on average, most students apply to anywhere from 8 to 12 universities, you'd easily be spending $140 to $185 if self-reported scores are not accepted. So just a heads up when you're trying to figure out your budget for how this process can go. These are like the minor costs that no one thinks about. Okay, but of course, not all universities require the test scores. So let's actually talk about this now, because as I mentioned, we're going to talk about test optional in this. So first we have test blind, and these are universities that will just not accept your SATs or ACTs under any circumstance. And you can try and shove it in their face, which really that means you go to College Board's website and you want to send your scores in, but when you're looking at the listing of universities to pick from as to who to send your score to, that university's name just never pops up. So you can never send your official score. Will they see your self-reported score? Yeah, but will they actually consider it? Probably not. Test flexible universities, such as NYU. These universities allow students to submit any other numbers. Usually it's 3 AP exam scores or 3 IB exam scores instead of the SAT or ACT scores. I will make note that usually there aren't enough test flexible schools out there, so you'll probably still have to take the SAT or ACT. And finally, test optional. So I think we all know, at this point, we all know it. We've heard of the term, and that's basically you can choose to send your score in if you feel it is a good representation of your abilities, but you don't have to. And here's what's been happening. So let's talk about COVID and what's happened. So when COVID came, we were all just wondering what was going to happen, and there were all kinds of things, different events being canceled and so on. And testing was one of them. It was hard to get registration done. It was hard to find a testing center. It was hard, and some exams were canceled last minute due to COVID rates spiking in certain areas and so on. So a lot of universities, approximately 1,200 of them, went test optional. Now, in the last year, they started rolling back the guidelines. So a lot of those test optional universities are now becoming test required. So all you current juniors, don't bank on the test optional. Let that be this happy bonus that you face, not the norm, but the happy bonus that you face, and plan to take the test. Okay, because those guidelines are rolling back. And yes, California has its own thing going, because they're no longer, at least the University of California system is no longer accepting scores for the time being. UConn and some other universities said, I believe until 2024, 2025, that they're no longer that they're not accepting scores or not requiring them or mandating them, but they'll accept them. It's test optional. So some of these universities left a little bit more wiggle room that might save you for a year. But then if you're currently a sophomore or under, just plan on the fact that the test will be there. Unfortunately, it is $1 billion industry. So while there will always be debate surrounding this idea of how important is this test? Is this relevant to anything? Does it actually measure anything at all? Which really it doesn't. Not really. And it's definitely not an indicator of intelligence. And I want to make sure that everyone's on the same page about that. It's not, it's just a puzzle. These tests are just puzzles, like doing a Rubik's Cube or doing a crossword, where how long did it take you to finish this or do it? Well, it depends. How much practice did you have? Okay. How long did it take you to do that Rubik's Cube, solve it? Well, how long did you practice? How long did you face all the different types of problems that could come up on this test and then learn how to navigate them? That's really all it is. It's just a puzzle you have to solve, but it's not an intelligence exam in any way. So all of those questions have been there for decades, and they're probably still going to continue. And there are alternative exams that some states are coming up with and so on. But like I said, these two are very major. So they still have a foothold on everything. So I recommend that just when you're planning your process, your college applications process, that you do factor in time for test prep. Now, how you do your test prep is up to you, and I'll share a few resources in a future slide. But just right now, be aware that when you're thinking of your timeline and everything, that you want to leave time for testing. Okay, so these are the upcoming test dates. And again, you will be receiving the PowerPoint, so you don't really have to take a screenshot unless you choose to. These are the upcoming test dates and registration dates. After that, by the way, registration is still allowed after these dates. It's simply that you'd have to pay a $30 to $40 late fee. So you can basically register up until like 2 weeks before the test. Usually the deadlines are a month before the official deadline. However, for late registration with that fee, you can register up until 2 weeks before the test. Okay, so common questions I get, and if you have any more, please post them in the chat. And I did see the question about the IB program, and I will get to that at the end of this particular slide, and then we'll address any questions after that too. Okay, so how many times should we take the test? I recommend 3. It's just a good cutoff because you don't know if you're applying to a score history, meaning they want all your score reports, or score choice. And also, having worked with test students, usually what happens is students kind of peak at some point, which is roughly 3 is the good number. And then after that, it's almost a law of diminishing returns, where they're so burnt out from looking at all of this and their schoolwork that needs to get done, extracurriculars that need to get done. Like, this test just ends up being annoying and frustrating, and it's a time commitment. So it's almost like more than 3, and students just, their scores tend to start dropping. Another question I get is, how much does it cost to take both tests? The cost goes up every year. Currently with the SAT, it's $60. And then with the ACT, they just really, and the $68 is if you're not taking the optional essay. And if you are taking the optional essay, then it's $93. What does it mean to cancel your scores or be absent? It's almost the equivalent of just having your test taken and thrown in the trash can. There's no record of it whatsoever, and colleges do not see that you were a no-show. That's between you and the test prep, or the testing company. So between you and College Board, and between you and SAT or ACT, sorry. When is a good time to start testing? Ideally, I would say beginning of junior year is my main recommendation. However, with a whole change coming up, I have a little bit of a different strategy, which I'll share in one of the next slides with the timeline. And should you take the exam to see how you do? Honestly, that depends on what universities you want to go to, because if you're, again, thinking of those score history universities, the really competitive ones that want all your scores, then no, you should not do that. Instead, what you should do is take a free exam at one of the test prep companies. Like the Princeton Review has that as a part of their marketing strategy. So you can just Google Princeton Review, Westport, or wherever. They'll probably give you a free online exam for each of them. Just register. And then whichever one you do better on, that's the one you take. And now you kind of have an idea of what the score ranges are. You know what good scores look like, or roughly. So you have an idea of what it means to do better on an exam, right? So you can gauge for yourself which exam it is that you need to put effort towards. Any university that accepts one exam also accepts the other. So you're not going to come across a situation in which you have to take both exams. Okay. All right. How long are scores valid? For 5 years. And You'll see different guidelines on this because if you go to College Board or ACT website, they say, oh, our scores are valid forever. But if you go to the university's website, which is really what we're mainly concerned with, they'll say, oh, we prefer scores from the recent 5-year time frame. So we're going to go with what the universities want since that's our end goal. And I'll say 5 years. So if you're thinking of taking a gap year, it's okay. If you're thinking of joining in the military, which I've had actually for at the Reading Library for one of the live presentations, I've had someone ask me that question. And that my answer was, yes, you can take the SAT while you're still in high school. I recommend taking it in senior year instead of junior year so that your scores are valid for an extra year. And that way, when you come back from your 4 years of service, you don't have to review all this math again and everything again to take the test. Ideally, you want all your testing out of the way at the end of junior year. So let's talk about this. To answer first the question about what is the IB exam, it's something called the International Baccalaureate Program, and that's not offered in Reading. And it's an entirely different program that's based out of Geneva, Switzerland, but it has a separate curriculum that students follow. It can start as early as high school, but really the core part that we care about is really in high school. And they're just international exam students are required to take in junior and senior year. So they'll have to take a certain number of math classes, English, reading, etc., or language, and so on. And then they have to take it's European style testing. So you have to do the essays based, right? It's some multiple choice, but it's heavily essay based, and some content you have to remember for 2 years instead of just 1. So those are what IB exams are. And perfect scores for those are 7. Passing is depending on if usually it's a 4. But yes, those are what IB exams are. And when I mentioned the test flexible universities, those are the scores that you'd be sending in instead of your SAT score. Okay, so question I received is, I mentioned that earlier, if your child's strength is in math, then SAT is a bit more fit. Oh, I actually, if your child's strength is in math, then, I mean, honestly, this is where I recommend just just taking a free exam from test prep companies, because what I mentioned is that there's more math in the ACT, and because there's more math in the ACT, meaning pre-calculus is involved and actual trigonometry is involved, that it is tempting to say, oh, we should do the ACT because it shows more math. But the main point I wanted to make is, take whichever exam is best for you that you do the better on, but don't rely on the ACT to highlight your math abilities. If you want to highlight your math abilities, and I said ACT, but just to clarify, don't rely on the ACT to highlight your math abilities just because it has a little bit more math in it, because that's not really the important part that the universities will look at. Instead, you want to show you're great at math, take the AP classes for math, or take higher level math that's offered in your high school, because that's more of a long-term commitment to math, a whole year, as opposed to this 3-hour exam. Okay, then, okay, so now the question is, should juniors try to get tests done before it changes? And that brings us actually to our very next portion, which is, what's our next steps? So, okay, first, there are a couple of resources you should be aware of. So College Board's website, ACT's website, I always lean more towards College Board stuff, and SAT, just because as a company, they've put out way more content, way more practice problems and sample exams and everything. ACT doesn't really do that, which is why, from a tutor perspective, instructor perspective, it's just frustrating, because if I want someone to improve, I kind of need a question set to give them. Reliable question sets to give them, because even a lot of the prep books that are out there, they're not reliable question sets. They're not close enough to the real test. So I find College Board does a better job of that. And then with connection to College Board is Khan Academy, because College Board partnered with Khan Academy to provide free SAT prep to students of all backgrounds, just to make it kind of an equalizer. Now, it's great, and there are people who have gotten great, like 1450s and above from that. But I will say that they don't cover strategy. So what will happen when you go on Khan Academy is they'll cover the core content you would have learned in class. So, hey, how do you solve this problem? Oh, here's the mathematical way of doing it. But you're not going to find shortcuts or something that will help you approach it. And then, of course, there are test prep companies, like I mentioned, that for free exams, just go to the test prep companies, the Bridgewaters, but mostly I'd recommend right now, particularly because of the change, I would recommend the big companies like the Princeton Review companies or the Kaplan companies, because they have, first of all, they're international. So since March, when that SAT went international, digital SAT went international, the Kaplans and the Princeton Reviews have had that money and the locations to actually be collecting all this information and questions and data and so on. So they can design these questions better suited for us, whoever's prepping. So that's what I recommend. Individual tutors, including myself, may not be the best option right now because we just don't have the question sets. We don't have the books that have the questions. We need to, I mean, I kind of have an idea on strategy because you spend enough time looking at the questions, but again, we need a little bit more detail before we can reliably say, hey, yes, I'd be happy to take your kid on and help you get to that particular score, because we haven't looked at the exam enough either. There's just not enough material out there. That's my recommendation. That's just my thought. Okay, create a list of universities if you have not done so. And like I mentioned, just note down what the score requirements are. That's what you really need to know. So note that down. That way you have a target score to aim for. And then allow at least 3 months of prep time. And that's where, let's actually talk a little bit more. Of course, figure out your study method. And really with parents, I've had parents who told me, oh, I signed my teenager up for this online video course. And then the teenagers will tell me, yeah, I never clicked on it. I logged on twice and never again. So just make sure that whatever method you pick is effective for your teenager. Okay, now let's talk about what you should do. First, if possible, I recommend taking a free SAT or ACT as soon as possible. So that's one of the action steps, is just go on these websites, find a free exam, register yourself, and take it. Why? Because you're going to look at the old exam for the SAT, but you want to know how you do. And now that you have your college list and some idea of what the most competitive university on your list is, if how you perform is significantly different from where you need to get, then testing right now is not going to be very helpful, because chances of you significantly improving, especially with the holidays coming up, the quarters closing, everything, of you significantly improving by November, and it's usually the first Saturday of whichever month. So significantly improving by then, chances are slim. And then to add to that, if it's just a small improvement that you need, maybe you're off by, let's say 50 to 100 points, which on the old SAT is about 10 questions, 5 to 10, 12 questions. Okay. Always add at least 4 more to whatever, because every question is about 10 points. Plus add an extra bonus for any particular mistakes. Then if you're only a little bit off, then yes, take the old exam, get it out of the way. So really it depends on where you currently stand. And if there is a big difference between where you currently are and where you need to go, then I recommend starting test prep early on in November, as opposed to waiting until January or February, which is what a lot of families do. Is they'll reach out to me or whatever, and they'll say, hey, can we prepare for the March exam? And I want to say yes, and we do, but it's almost a waste of your money, because what happens is January is when midterms hit, and I tend to, again, students are focused on their midterm stuff, so it's harder to assign them homework that's going to lead to any significant score improvement. There's schoolwork going on, extracurriculars going on. It's hard to go hardcore at it, so give it more prep time, okay? And be ready for the March exam, and that's digital. Familiarize yourself with the questions. There are more questions on College Board's website. The difference is simply that it's not an adaptive part. So you're just going to see all these questions listed out, but they're not going to adjust to you because it's in PDF form. So they're not going to say, oh, this based on these person's strengths and weaknesses, here's the new set of questions. It's not going to do that. It's just in PDF form. So you can always take a look at those on College Board's website. For ACT stuff, you can look at ACT's website. They have free resources. Again, that exam has not changed in a while, but even though they haven't changed in a while and it's still the same as when I took it, there just aren't enough questions or resources provided for them, which makes it a little bit harder to improve on, because at some point, even when you see that a book has 1,400 ACT questions, you're going to run out of that pretty quickly. It sounds like a lot, but you go through that very, really quickly. So that's something to note. It's just take the free exams, figure out which university is the topmost choice, see what the requirements for those top universities are, see how you performed on those free exams, see what the difference is between the two. If it's a small difference, then yes, you could very well test before the holidays and be done. And if it's a significant difference, then maybe around November, December, start prepping for your March exam. Okay. And of course, what's really going to happen is while the SAT and ACTs are offered around this time of the year, that's when students are really concerned with their AP exams and their finals. So this is also when, I mean, speaking from experience and probably saving parents a lot of money, it's just this is when your test prep ends up being a waste of money because I lose students then. They can't make it to the session because they're working on they have some AP review stuff coming up. They have finals that they need to study for, or the quarter's closing out and suddenly they're swamped. They're bombarded with all of the schoolwork, the quizzes and everything that your teachers are trying to squeeze in all the grades for. So lots of cancellations happen. Doing 10 sessions across a period is different than doing 10 sessions in a consistent manner, right? So you paid the same amount, but now if the 10 sessions were spread out across 4 or 5 months, that's different than 10 sessions that were done in a concentrated 2-month period where we can track the improvement, keep going, et cetera. So just to save you some money and give you some strategy on that, if you're going to invest in prep, it really should be soon in November, December, as opposed to when everything just goes hardcore. And that way you start early. Yeah, maybe teenagers had to take a little bit break for midterms, but you're still on track. Okay. All right. All of this is stuff you've probably seen covered. Really just main thing, just with respect to time, you're going to have all of this in writing as well. So don't worry about it. But with respect to time, I do want to wrap up and just wanted to introduce you to an online course that I've been working on. It's basically a lot of videos, just like you see me do, all this information that we've gone on and so much more with graphics and trackers and checklists and timelines and everything. So I created a video course just because not everyone needs somebody to be there for them or needs that college counselor. So if you are interested in something like that, there is going to be a support system. So there is a Facebook community and a live Q&A monthly to answer any questions, and you have lifetime access and automatic updates. So this is really a lot of, the idea is because it's my first time doing it, I wanted to make it very, very cheap and affordable. But if you have multiple kids, I mean, I will be updating that information as it goes. So if you are interested, then at the moment, the website, I can send you the information, but the website is still under construction until at least the 10th of October, according to the web designer. But that's the Google form that I'm asking everyone to fill out who is interested. So I can just email you when that course is open. And if you'd like to see the landing page on the website, if you're on your phone and looking at this, then that just might be a little bit slow on the loading because I decided that I wanted to edit my own website, my old website, because I absolutely had to learn the skill. And I may or may not have super messed it up, which is why I now need a web designer to redo the whole thing. So that's where we're at. All right, so thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, please email me or just post them in the chat. Here's my email address right here. And again, any social media information that you'd like, it's all over here. Again, most of this information is available for free on my social media. So please be sure to check it out. And thank you so much for attending.